Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast with your host, Troy Wallace, a podcast for human resources information systems professionals to help you elevate your HRIS career. We always say no one gets into HRIS on purpose, but it sure is interesting to find out how they did. We interview your HRIS peers to find out how they got tricked into the industry and what lessons and tools they use to progress their careers along the way. We discuss industry trends, AI, and even talk candidly about all the most popular HRIS platforms. Just think of it as the closest bar just outside the entrance of your favorite HR technology conference. Now you get it. Welcome in. Welcome to the HRIS Careers Podcast, broadcasting as usual from the beautiful studios in downtown Omaha, Nebraska. So I don't often do anything to promote my own business. So I run a small consulting company called HCM Cloud Consultants. So it's HCMCloudConsultants.com. But I am going to do a little self-promotion on this one. I was invited to speak to an OHUG, which is an Oracle HCM user group, and specifically on Taleo. My company, HCM Cloud Consultants, has specialized in Taleo applicant tracking systems in addition to doing some Oracle HCM Cloud, and now the successor product, Oracle Recruiting Cloud, a cornerstone of my business. So I was invited. They were asking for different ideas on what to present on. And I mentioned that there's a lot of companies that are having to make the decision to move to a different platform. A lot of people are afraid that, it's going to be sunset at some point. I thought it would be good to do a session specifically. What do we do on that fateful day that we get that sunset notice? I think this can be applicable to more than just Taleo or Oracle users. If you're on a cloud platform and need to move from one to the other, this will be helpful. Obviously, if you're considering moving applicant tracking systems, this will be really relevant to you. And then even more specifically, if you do have this problem of wanting to move off of Taleo because you think they're going to sunset it and move to Oracle Recruiting Cloud or Workday or SuccessFactors, I have done all of those projects. Certainly reach out to me. I'd love to help you. It is HCM Cloud Consultants. You can reach me directly at troy.wallace@hcmcloudconsultants.com. And again, don't want this to be a huge commercial for my company, but this is one that I thought would be useful. So I took the presentation. I did do some editing to protect the innocent. So there were a lot of questions. It was a lively discussion about this issue, but I did cut out the questions from the crowd, and I do cut in every once in a while to make some clarifications so you don't get confused on the recording. But would love you to go out and take this in on YouTube. There's a nice slideshow, a couple animations that I put on. You'll see my dog, all kinds of things to go out to YouTube. And while you're out there, we would certainly appreciate it if you would subscribe. I think we're getting close to 600 subscribers now and would love to push that to 1,000. Without further ado, let's take you right into the presentation. I'm not trying to be too dramatic, but I know everybody's probably been thinking about this subject now for the last 2 to 3 years. And so I call it Taleo-mageddon. So number one, if you've decided to leave Taleo on your own, and maybe you're in that planning stages, or if we get that dreaded notice at some point, so planning for whether it's voluntary or involuntary, essentially a guide to surviving if Oracle ever does send that, again, dreaded end-of-life announcement and sunsets Taleo. So number one, I want to thank the folks from OHUG, David and Janice, Allie and Sarah. I appreciate you guys helping me with all the technicals and getting this set up. And everybody here, I certainly appreciate you being here. This is an honor for me. I've been coming to OHUGs every now and then for the last 3 to 5 years, and I was very happy to be asked as a presenter. All right, so let's move on. So again, my name is Troy Wallace. I'm an independent consultant with HCM Cloud Consultants. I've been working with Taleo since 2009, so the way I got introduced to it, I'm an old ADP PeopleSoft payroll person, and I took a job with a company in Phoenix, and they essentially had Taleo as what I call shelfware. It was sitting there, they just weren't really using it, and that's what got me into Taleo in the first place. I never thought it was going to be a broadly adopted tool, and then Starbucks and Citigroup and all kinds of big companies started on it. I started going to the conferences, and my career just naturally turned in that direction. So functional analysis, reporting, configuration, advanced integration with the TCC tool, I've done it all. So now over the last 8 years, really involuntarily, because I'm a big fan of Taleo, I wish it was going to survive forever. I've ended up helping, I think I counted up 9 different organizations migrate off the platform, and it's a wide variety. So some people wanted to make the move to Oracle Recruiting Cloud. That's certainly happening more often now. Some moved to SAP SuccessFactors, some to Workday. And these tend to be organizations between 6 to 30 to 40,000 employees. So definitely not small headcount. So again, I just want to be clear, because I'm not meaning to ever be derogatory to anything Oracle related. I am a huge fan of Taleo. I wish and hope that it survives and thrives for a long, long time. But if it doesn't, if we ever get this dreaded notice, what we're looking at is, if you're in an end-of-life scenario, I would say your best case scenario, you choose when to leave Taleo. It's on your own timeline. Obviously, worst case scenario, what we showed in that video. And if anybody wants that clip to make their case one way or the other to their boss, I'm certainly willing to provide it with all the fun audio in there. Either way, you're going to need a plan to migrate, get your data out, transition to a new ATS, ensure you've got compliance with all your data retention policies. So that's what I want to talk about primarily today. So all this talk about dates, and boy, I went to the HR Technology Conference. So that's actually where I got acquainted with David earlier this year. And there were just all kinds of rumors flying. Again, as far as I know, and I talked to a lot of customers, there is no end of life notice out there. My personal opinion is they're going to have to give people at least 5 years. That's certainly not official from Oracle, but I just feel like there's too many large organizations that are on there. So all this talk about dates. So get your fingers ready. I think we're just going to have you chat into the chat area. So we're going to play a little game called Chronology. And I don't know if you've ever played it before, but it's essentially you get a date, and I'm simplifying it a little bit, and you just guess whether the event is before, between, or after the date range I give you. So we'll play. First question. The date Oracle Corporation acquires Taleo Corporation. If anybody wants to answer verbally, get on the mic and go ahead and do so. So 2013, first date. 2016 is the second date. Was it before, in between, or after that date? Anybody brave enough to make a guess? Verbally? Let's everybody let off the hook. Yeah. February 9th, 2012, in this case, it was before. All right, question number 2. Taleo is founded in Quebec City on this date. First date, 1991. Second date, 1995. Is it before, between, or after? 1996, so it is after. All right, question number 3. Big one, maybe a little more low-key. People who've been involved probably for a while may get this one. Oracle Corporation acquires Select Minds, which essentially became Social Sourcing. 2011 to 2014, was it before, in between, or after?
Between, after.
No consensus, huh? No consensus.
Yeah.
All right. September 12th, 2012. Oh, we got some historians there. A lot of people picked between.
Got them.
And I'll ask one more question. So Taleo goes public on the NASDAQ stock exchange. 1999 to 2004. Was it before, between, or after? I thought this one, because this is a deep cut. September 2005, it was after. So my point is, what got me thinking about a lot of dates is everybody's wondering, when is that date? We all feel like we're going to get that end of life notice. So this may be interesting to everybody. So if you put your answer in the chat, I will take the time to try and go aggregate it and get the information out to people later. So last question. Oracle announces end of life for Taleo. Is your prediction before 2027, between 2027 and 2032, or after 2032? Well, I had to really think how much space to put in that between thing, and I felt like 5 years that could draw some attention.
Well, I thought I'd jump in here again real quick. So it was interesting after we took this little quiz about Taleo. The last question was about when people thought the product may be sunset. So when the notice would actually come out from Oracle. And it was almost unanimous in the chat that everybody had chosen the between, which was between the dates of 2027 and 2032. So if you're looking for a consensus, it seems like everybody's expecting end of life to happen sometime in that time frame. So anywhere from 5 to 7 years out. Just thought that was interesting. I wanted to point that out.
So again, I'm a fan of Taleo. I've attached a lot of my career to it. I hope it survives forever. But, if it doesn't, I'm going to give you as much as I can about my experience. Again, I've had a wide array of situations. And so I want to leave you with the kind of the anatomy of what a migration may look like. I'm going to really dig deep in your contract. There's something that talks about what happens if you leave Taleo. I mean, nobody ever thinks they're going to leave a cloud tool like that, but obviously the world is shifting, and I can tell you it's happening in droves. And then we'll talk about kind of what a high-level project plan may look like. What would you need to do before you leave Taleo? Where's your data going to sit? Who can access it? What tools may be needed to convert and migrate the data? And what does officially decommissioning the system look like? We'll talk about the tools that are available for export and migration. And my big warning is going to everybody, get ahead of it. I know it's front of mind for you if you're probably at this meeting and part of the OHUG. You're probably a Taleo fan and live it every day. But a lot of organizations, you'd be absolutely amazed how they just simply don't think about it. All right, so let's talk about what Oracle leaves you with. What's their data obligation? Obviously, I don't know what's in your actual contract. You could have contracted something custom. But in general, they do promise that they're going to provide you with your data. It's probably in small print somewhere. You may have not looked at your contract unless you've had a renewal, in the last couple of years. But I would advise everybody to go read what's there. They will provide you your data. It is what I call the nasty data archive of Taleo data. And I'm going to go into a little more depth of what that looks like. So they will fulfill their obligation by giving you a full database of essentially every bit of your content right down to the historical transaction level. The issue is it is in a very raw database. It's just tables. There's no joins. And you can see this image here is actually part of the data dictionary that they will give you. Not a lot of detail. It's kind of figured out yourself. We hope you know the data really well to be able to cobble this back together. I call it like Humpty Dumpty getting put back together again. So it certainly makes you appreciate how much work OBI and the reporting tools, TCC, are doing for you behind the scenes to connect all of the data. Because when you get into this database, you realize how many disparate tables that data is sitting in to just pull information on a requisition. So again, you do get a data dictionary. It will tell you the basics of the table structure, but there is not a lot of descriptive detail of what all of those tables do. It's essentially self-service. They will give you the files. You would install it on your database, typically another Oracle database that you may have, and then it's there to do with what you want. But again, it's figuring it out, writing down. So I'll tell you a little story about how I got involved in the first place. So this was about 2016. So it was actually an Omaha employer, over 10,000 employees. So they were not unsophisticated. They were moving to Workday. They moved to Workday, decided to implement the recruiting module, and they just simply didn't think about what would happen if there were certain lawsuits. They had to go get data retention, filing their end-of-year reports for government agencies. And I got a call in a panic and got connected with them. And that's where I first got introduced to this, what I call the nasty database archive. So over time, I've been able to cobble together a nice suite of reports. You are able even to get to your documents, the binaries in the documents, and you can convert that with additional software. So it's all there. It meets their obligation to provide the data. It's just pretty nasty to deal with. Oh, had that slip in there. I just let you know I'm so into Taleo that we named our dog Taleo. Moving on. So I want to stop right there. Well, not an adorable dog. We can stop on the adorable dog if you want to. I've talked about this kind of nasty database. It is the first step. It is kind of the fail-safe with your data. Does anybody have any questions about what that looks like? Or I've got some other slides here, but I thought this would be a logical time to pause and talk about what that looks like. And we're certainly going to talk more about my recommendations on not relying on that database and what to do proactively, but anything out there?
So I wanted to interject again real quickly here. We had a question from the audience about what was the actual format of this archive file. And essentially, it is, I think what they call a .gz file. Somebody from the audience actually knew that specifically. And it's essentially a compressed database file that you could remount to an Oracle database in your system and extract it. So again, if you need help with any of this down the road, certainly let me know at troy.wallace@hcmcloudconsultants.com.
It's essentially an Oracle database. Yeah, so the binary is there. So just like if you have any TCC processes that convert documents for a DocuWare or a third-party repository, there is a similar function, piece of Java code that would allow you to continue to pull that data out of this database and convert it to its native format, Word, PDF.
So here someone asked specifically about how many tables were in this big, what I call nasty archive database. And so I go on a little bit about it. But in the meantime, I was able to actually look up what that number is. And it was even larger than I thought. I believe when we did the analysis, it was 2,419 distinct tables. So, obviously not all of them have a ton of data in them. There's translate tables, all kinds of good stuff. But yeah, it was a large number. So just that I wanted to interject with that.
I have it somewhere because I've counted.
North of 50.
No. We're short of 1,000, but it's. I'll have to go. I'll go count. I can send some notes.
More than 100.
Oh wait, yes, way more than 100. Absolutely.
Oh, got it.
So the last project that I was involved with was one where they probably didn't archive proactively as well as they should. Now they had a very sophisticated IT staff, so they were able to do some things I haven't seen clients do, but they did have to rely on me to interpret the table. So I have no doubt that a database person can deal with this database. It's more of how do you piece. Now, I haven't let AI take a crack at it since AI has come out. My last project really dealing with this was probably in the fall of 2024. But yeah, so I can get you, and I don't think these data tables or this data map is a big secret. It will be provided to you as part of your decommissioning. But yeah, I will get an exact number because I know I've counted that before. But it's much, much more than you would ever think.
So here somebody in the audience talked about whether, I'll kind of quote the question that they asked. So it said, does Oracle provide a safe passage or an easy passage to go from Taleo to ORC? So, I'll let you listen to the answer. But if you do need help with this is something that we're starting to get really good at
HCM Cloud Consultants. So please reach out, troy.wallace@hcmcloudconsultants.com if you need assistance with this type of project. My experience so far is it is the Wild West. So I will give you an example, and this is a simple example, but right in Taleo, they call it in the CSW, it's steps and status. Okay, those are going to map over pretty directly, but of course they've called them phase and state in ORC. So there's obviously very similar functionality, but they certainly don't have something to take your configuration from Taleo. I'm an old PeopleSoft person, and we used to have this thing called the upgrade utility, which was fantastic for moving configuration information from one database to the other. There is nothing like that. So it's not like you can take a data file and then import it into ORC, and it's going to understand that, oh, if you had this many steps and statuses in your candidate selection workflow in Taleo, now I've just configured that and set that up on ORC. Similarly, it's certainly not one-to-one, and I'm just involved in a project right now with a large school system that's making the move, and there is mapping even to ORC, because there are things that were called one thing in Taleo, there are another, it's called something else slightly, or the translate tables are different on ORC. So I think myself and other consulting companies are probably getting better and better and better at least writing this, having scripts available and ready to start with, so they can make that journey easier. But if you're not running Oracle HCM right now, you will find when you import data, it needs it more granular, I'll call it, level. So I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but for instance, if you are bringing over a candidate profile, you're going to bring over their candidate profile, then you're going to bring another file with their work history, then you're going to bring another file with their certifications, and another one with their education. And depending on what you're setting up in ORC, there is a mapping exercise for sure. So to ultimately answer the question, are there going to be some similarities going to ORC? Yes, but if you are considering Workday or Greenhouse or SuccessFactors or some other platform, will the lift be dramatically different and easier than going to ORC? I would say no. All right. Oh, there's the dog again.
So Troy, will you be talking in later slides about then, since there is all that data, is our customers doing things like just paring down and just taking key contact information and maybe last resume or something? Are they doing things to kind of make it easier? Are you seeing any patterns there that?
So I will, yeah. So all over the map.
Okay.
So at the end, yes, I'll give kind of my recommendations of what I like, what I've seen be successful. But, well, I can talk about it now. So the first one of these that I encountered was probably 2013. It was a very savvy that I think they were bought out by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And they simply just took almost like your candidate flow reports, and they just exported 6 months worth out of OBI. I think that back then it was still the old reporting tool, and that was it. And God bless them. Hopefully they didn't have any legal issues or anything like that, but that was it. But then I've had companies go as far as, and this is honestly what I would recommend, is understanding what your data needs are, getting ahead of it, and trying to pull that information using the native tools. So in most cases, it would be Taleo Connect Client, and finding a good repository for that on your SharePoint, on your servers, someplace. And I've had companies go as far as then taking that archive database. I help them write a ton of queries on it, and then they put a nice little GUI in front of it to allow some people to have self-service access to it. So I have seen things that have been all over the map as far as bringing data over. But I actually have a sample kind of scope, and then some other real-life samples that I'll share with you before we're done here. So getting into that, what do you need to before you leave? Obviously, data retention. What are your archive needs? What will you migrate to the new ATS for day one? Where's this data going to sit? Is it going to be on SharePoint? Are you going to create your own databases? Just keeping in file structures. A lot of companies I've dealt with have just taken the documents and we put in some sort of smart coding in the file name structure, and it just sits out there and they search for them when they need them. We'll talk about what tools. I think most people are familiar with Taleo Connect Client. That tends to be what tends to be best, at least while you still have access to Taleo and the tools. Detailed scope. So we'll talk a little bit about what you want to move for day one versus what you want to move for archive. And then obviously there'll be a lot of change management and what decommissioning the system looks like. So number one, knowing your data retention and archive needs. You know that better than anybody else. What are your company policies on data retention? What government regulations dictate how much data and which data to retain? Are there any pending legal proceedings that may require you to keep more data or less data? Are you operating in certain countries that have rules around this? So just kind of understanding, if you're going to leave, what do you need from a data retention standpoint? And again, I already told you the story of the Omaha employer that just kind of caught red-handed, and they just simply didn't think about this. And they had no choice but go back to what I call the nasty database archive. What must be moved to a new ATS on day one? Obviously, it's going to be up to you in the organization. What I tend to find is when we're talking about day one activities, what are your active or open requisitions? And then what candidates are attached to those open requisitions? To me, that's normally priority one. In a perfect world, and the world's certainly not perfect when you're moving to a new ATS, you would want someone to come in on or leave the office on Friday. We do the conversion over the weekend. They come in on Monday, use the new tool, and if somebody was in the interview step with the status of second interview, they'd come into ORC or Workday or whatever it is, and that person's in that exact same step and status or whatever the equivalent is in the new system. So obviously that would be the gold standard. So you would have to consider your open requisitions, what candidates. Some people only decide to bring candidates that are still in contention for the requisition. So if someone's been dispositioned and rejected, because they want to make that initial lift easier with less data, they may only bring those that are still in competition for that open position. Got to think about how many offers are there if you filled the requisition and there's been offers, or if you were using the onboarding module, how much of your onboarding tasks are you going to close people out in their onboarding process in the old system and then start anew with the new system? What are your critical positions? Key user roles and permissions. Obviously, you want to think about all of that and use that as a map to migrating to a new system. Attachments. So we could talk for 20 minutes about attachments, but those tend to be important to organizations, and it is pretty clunky. You can get them. You can get them now, whether you have TCC. You still can get them, even if you get that nasty database archive. It's just the processing has to be accounted for because it does take a while. If you've been on Taleo for 10 years, and depending on your volume, you could have truckloads, that's a technical term, truckloads of data just in your attachments. Let's open this up for questions now, if people have questions now. But normally, I would say anything that's attached to an open requisition, that is kind of my starting place with looking at a scope for what you want to bring over to your ATS on day one. So here's someone in the audience asked the following question. It essentially was, whether or not So here's somebody in the audience asked the following question. Essentially they asked, could you take a copy of your Oracle database or Taleo and just store it somewhere accessible, like in another ATS applicant tracking system type database? So you can hear my answer. He talks specifically about a product called Resumate, which I guess is a cheaper kind of Taleo ATS alternative, but I will let you hear my answer. I have not had anybody shift everything to another kind of, I'll call it third-party commercial tool. Yeah. I have had, it was a pretty large but regional bank, and they did spend a lot of time. I helped them write the queries on that kind of nasty database archive, but they did take the time once we did that, and they built a small, I can't remember what they built it in, some probably open source, third-party language. They just put a user interface on it that was slightly more friendly than somebody having to type in the SQL. So they just created kind of a suite of reports. They figured out what are the things that people want most often, and they solved it that way. Whereas the most recent project that I worked on, where again they got stuck with the old nasty database, is they did have a pretty sophisticated IT folks, but they didn't understand the data. So I helped them understand the data, write a suite of SQL reports. They're pretty savvy. They could do the adjustments that they needed, but they were, and maybe they regret this now because maybe they've put way too much work on their plate, but they are essentially, they are the ombudsman, or they're the only way that the HR folks can get a report. So you've got to make the request into the IT department, and they'll use one of the existing queries and go find the data for them and push it out. So depending on how self-service you want this data to be, taking the time to put it in a more user-friendly database may be worth it to you. I have been very surprised how many people just throw it into database tables and just hope nobody asks. Nobody asks. I don't think so. No, it can be. So I would say if you are proactive and you figure out what are the things people are going to need to report on, you're going to have much better luck pulling that data out using, Oracle Intelligence, OBI, or TCC ahead of time to kind of bring all that information together with the power of those tools have to do the kind of auto joining. It really is eye-opening when you get into that nasty database archive and you find out that to recreate everything on a requisition, you actually have to pull from 6 to 8 different tables in that archive. Like I said, again, you appreciate what these tools were doing for you to kind of bring all that together in a cohesive way. So to answer your question, I would say that is possible. And that's what some companies have done, is when they're proactive, and probably 2 or 3 of them have done this. We just try to do the best job we can before Taleo was decommissioned to pull that data. And a lot of companies do this natively already because they're running a data warehouse. But it's almost creating a data warehouse using the TCC scripts to populate it. And then that is more normalized, and then therefore you could use it much more the way you're talking about, where you could just have a big CSV file. If you want to go find somebody's details of their submission, then Control F and go find it. So here somebody asked about whether or not there was an offline version of Taleo. Somebody later in the call asked about just kind of a somebody later in the call also asks about a premise, and somebody later in the call also asks about a premise-based, kind of the same concept, offline or premise-based. Short answer was no, but I'll let you listen to my answer. Now, I did also mention that, there's a possibility you could negotiate kind of a view-only version of Taleo for a period of time. And we did have somebody else come on the call that said that they had successfully done that. They had negotiated, I think, 3 years of a view-only database. And then they moved on to, I think, success factors. But so that was the first time I had heard somebody successfully negotiating that long of a period of time to have Taleo available. All right, we'll get to the answer. So here's what I call the platinum or the gold-plated plan. Mm-hmm. And everything is negotiable, especially if you're going to another Oracle product, right? So, the gold standard would be, let's say you decide to make the move this year, and you just decided, you said, hey, Oracle, and I've never heard anybody doing this, by the way, but if we're spitballing ideas, boy, we do want to move to ORC, and by the way, we'll go Oracle HCM as well, but you know what we really want is we want you to give us a reportable version of Taleo that stands up for our data retention period, which is 3 years. And if you would do that for us and make Taleo available, that database available for the next 3 years, we'll buy off on the rest of the package, right? I mean, that's the gold standard. That's the platinum version, is that you actually just have access to Taleo for the 3 years or whatever your data retention policy is. So I would say most companies are not willing to pay for that. And I want to talk a little bit about that later if we have time.
That's the day we actually did that. So
you did.
We have a read-only version of Taleo, but it's I think our 3 years is up or whatever that was. So now we got to move that data over to somewhere else. We ended up going to SuccessFactors, but they did give us that, right, for a read-only version of Taleo for like X number of years. So it is possible.
Yeah. So there you go. We've got an example of one person that's done it. Like I said, I tell people that hypothetically, I've not heard somebody execute. It's excellent negotiating.
That's nice. Yeah, I mean, 3 years is a little less, but yeah, definitely that's a good option. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the reason 3 years in my mind is working on a situation with a state agency, and I was surprised, but that was their criteria is 3 years worth of data. I was actually surprised. It seemed a little short, but all right. So if you see here, this is just a kind of a sample conversion if you're looking to archive or bring data over. So a couple of pitfalls. So you've got your base candidate profile. And then, of course, you got your candidate attachments. But then you've got to realize that, especially if you're moving to ORC or any other third party, and you want to bring that data over, those are all kind of additional data buckets, data strings that you would need to bring over. And typically, depending on the import capability of the new system, you may need to bring over the candidate profile first, right? Then you bring over the work experiences and they're attached. Then the education, they're attached. Certifications, they're attached. All of that just starts to add up for conversion, mapping. So I've had companies that say, you know what? We just want the candidate profile, or they'll say, we just want the candidate profile and work experience. It's just been all over the map what people have wanted. So there's candidate information, offer, onboarding can be its own monster, depending on how much you want to bring over, especially with all the documents people tend to use in the onboarding processes. Requisition data, much easier to bring over if you're using TC to bring it over to a data repository first. Again, in that nasty database archive, you would be amazed at how many data tables you have to hit to actually bring back together what looks like just one instance of a requisition string. The other thing I want to call out is, and these are just little, if you come back and listen to this presentation on a year or 2 years, when you decide to move, or if you decide to move, you got to think about things in candidate perspective or the candidate like general profile. And then you also have to think about, do you really need all of that submission specific information? So if you are looking to really recreate a full candidate submission or application in your new system, there is a slight difference of what's sitting at that general profile area in the database tables versus the application specific or the job submission. So that could be a whole call in itself. But if you're listening to this in a couple of years, I wanted to call that out as one of those things that you really have to look at closely, especially for conversion. All right. So how long will you have access to Taleo after switching? Well, we just heard one example. They were able to negotiate to have it for 3 years. What I've seen most common is that people will maybe they'll negotiate a little more time. I haven't seen anybody be that successful with 3 years. I'm sure that was at a cost, but had a company that just timed it where they did move to ORC, but they were going to have, I believe, 8 more months on Taleo. So we did move a bunch of data with TCC. We archived as much as we could, but if they found through the first 6 months that there were certain things that were missing, they did have access to Taleo for a period of time. I think even as a result of some of the requests, we did kind of a secondary push of some of the data. So again, everything's negotiable, depending on what, I think it's especially if you're moving to another Oracle service, it's certainly probably a little more user-friendly. And then, of course, you're always going to have access to the nasty database archive after you go dark. Tools for available for migration. Depending on how deep you're into Taleo, you probably know these tools. So obviously it's the Oracle Intelligence or OBI. There's certainly data limits there. I have had companies, because they didn't want that much data, we just wrote the extracts in OBI. It was in a user-friendly format that they were used to seeing, and that did the trick for them. Obviously, Taleo Connect Client, certainly I think is the best tool with the different data limits. Depending on how complex and how much volume you have, most companies don't hit the daily limits that Taleo Connect Client puts on you, but those are there. So sometimes you do have to ask them to lift that restriction while you're doing your conversion or your archive. APIs, I just don't think they're user-friendly enough, and they have more constraint on data limits. Again, if you do bring over that nasty archive, you can use SQL. I've built quite a few queries and have a suite of queries that work in that database. But again, I've seen people all over the map on different scopes, tools, methods. I've been really surprised. As a matter of fact, I've even been on a project and they just decided to do nothing. So that happens as well. Data conversion, scripting, and importing. I think we'll hit on most of these.
Yeah,
Is there another question? So here there was another question from the audience about the completeness of this archive, or I call it the nasty archive database in the presentation. And I will let you hear the answer.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I've never had a use case to go back and look for. I have never had a use case where somebody wanted to go see like the login detail of somebody when they logged in, when they didn't. But it is literally everything in your database. As a matter of fact, they probably expose more in those database tables than you have access through TCC or OBI or any of those tools. So if the hard part is piecing it back together in that data archive. And I'm sorry, you asked about the data archive, right?
Kind of.
It's all, I'm just going to say, I'll go on a limb and say it's all there, because I believe that contractual commitments that they have to provide you with all of your data. They just don't do a great job of telling you how you put it back together again. And like I said, it has been, I think I've dealt with that database 5 times or 6 times, and I keep learning new things. But what I do learn is that everything's there. So even if you wanted to recreate the transactional history log that you see kind of in the bottom pane of Taleo or on that tab when you go in as a user, it's all there. It's just a matter of being able to piece it all together in a way that makes sense and make sure you're doing all the joins right. So here's another question from the crowd. Here's another question from the audience, and it was revolving around, is everything recoverable? There was a similar question earlier, but it's really, can you really truly piece back everything together? And this one revolved a little more about around documents, specifically onboarding documents, but I'll let you hear my response. Easily recoverable is the $1 million issue. So like, for instance, you can get your documents, right? If somebody attaches a resume, it's there. The binary is there. There is a way to pull that out and then convert it back to its binary native form. I've been able to do it. I'm sure other organizations have been able to do it. It's just a matter of knowing where do they keep that piece of binary information and then being able to pull it out. Right. And so, Charles, you can take advantage of this too. I'm hoping someday that a lawyer is going to come to me and ask me to show how this data comes together as an expert witness, right? In some employment case, because you just you kind of understand how it works. So in that case, and it's been a while, but I believe if you've configured, I'm going to call it quote right. It's not necessarily, it's right. There is a way to configure your onboarding process where that does kind of convert and save as a PDF, but people don't do that typically. And you're right, it's kind of in the ether. Could you somehow, if you're in a hot court case, go and figure out how a particular form was rendered when they e-signed it? Probably. But no, I would agree that there's certainly probably some limitations there. Some of the other things I think I already pointed out, just these are some like pitfalls, understanding on the candidate profile. You're also going to have to go get their work experience, education, certifications. pre-screening questions. So my last client wanted access to the pre-screening questions. And if you've ever dealt with that, even in OBI a little bit or TCC, you know that that can be a mess. In that nasty archive database, it's an equivalent mess and probably a little more. So obviously you have a candidate and then they apply to a specific position. And then you have the detail of all the pre-screening questions that have been submitted for that particular requisition or application. And it can be a deep, dark mess. So my last project, I did end up creating some queries that handled that, but yeah, it can be pretty nasty. So we talked a little bit about documents. That is usually the biggest. If you're going to convert those, it can be done with TCC. You can do it after the fact. You really want to look at your volume. And I got my first taste of this when they decommissioned the legacy onboarding and companies wanted to archive their data. So that can be a big lift if you're not regularly archiving your onboarding documents or applicant attachments as part of your normal hiring process. So what are your options for archiving? You know, we've talked a little bit about that. You've got database warehouses, you keep in CSV files. I think I've really pushed home that the fact that you're thinking about this already, I would just encourage everybody to be proactive. It puts you way ahead of the curve. Again, you'd be surprised how many organizations just simply don't think about this until it's too late and they end up with that nasty database archive. So if you're planning, just make sure that this gets in the project plan of if you're moving to a new ATS or ORC or whatever it may be, this is a primary component that needs to be dealt with. And obviously there can be a cost there. And conversion, it's hard, even if you're moving to the Oracle Recruiting Cloud. So I think that sums it up. Oh, yep. The one untruth I did tell, I did not name my dog Taleo. Her name is actually Sally.
And here there was another question about whether you could run a version of Taleo on premise.
I have not.
Okay. And
everything's negotiable though, right? No, I mean, Taleo was native cloud. It was kind of I think that's why Oracle bought them, is because they were so good at doing the cloud infrastructure. So it has never been available. I think they had a product called Smart Recruit, Smart Soft. I can't remember what it was called. That before it turned into Taleo, and maybe they had an on-prem version of that. But yeah, since I've been involved in 2009, it's always been just cloud.
And here was the final question from the audience. Again, it revolved around whether there was a good tool or pathing to convert data directly from Taleo to Oracle Recruiting Cloud. You can hear my answer, but this will be my last commercial. We are getting pretty good at this. We've got a couple of these projects under our belt, moving people from Taleo to Oracle Recruiting Cloud. So if you do need help with that, again, it's troy.wallace@hcmcloudconsultants.com, and I'll let you hear the answer.
It's not brute force if you've been through it before. And that's the key. So
right.
So you still, depending on where you're going, but if you're going to ORC, like for instance, I've now been through this twice going to ORC. So I have a set of scripts that are pretty good and getting better every iteration. So I'm not the only game in town. There would be probably all your big consulting companies, I hope, would be perfecting this, because at this point, if you are a Deloitte or you are a KPMG or whatever the may be, you've probably hit this a couple of times already. So hopefully people are getting better. But as far as I know, there is not a set of scripts that Oracle will give you that will push the data out of Taleo into Oracle Recruiting Cloud directly. And even so, they may not work exactly out of the box, because there can be some mapping there. But so no, I think the consulting companies are getting better at it. But yes, I mean, ultimately, if you're going to do it on your own and haven't done it before, it's kind of rebuilding the data to have it import into ORC. Yeah, so I always say it's not hard, but it can be time consuming. My belief is the way Oracle Recruiting Cloud HCM is built, they didn't really do us many favors as far as, because the way it likes to see data is in, I'll call it like more granular packets. There are some things you can do with the data loader to speed it up a little bit. But something like this, yes, we've been building the extracts out of Taleo and then the HDLs to load them in. And I feel pretty good about those at this point, but every client's a little bit different. So you definitely have to go through the process of going through a mapping exercise. You bet. I appreciate you guys having me. All right. And that was the end of the formal presentation. I'll have the show notes packed, resources. I'll do a blog post on this. So if you do have this particular problem, hopefully there'll be some resources out there that can help you. Again, if you do need help with this particular problem, whether you're moving specifically from Taleo to Oracle Recruiting Cloud, or have Oracle HCM Cloud projects, certainly my company can help you. Again, it's troy.wallace@hcmcloudconsultants.com. I certainly appreciate all you being out there and listening, and we'll talk to you all later.